Hey everyone, I'm Travis and this is Abby. Welcome to Concussion, a podcast where we dive deep into the world of brain trauma, breakthrough treatments, and inspiring recovery stories.
Hey Travis, I'm excited to be back here with you today and talk about how my approach to treating concussions has changed over the last 9 years and why it matters.
To give you a little roadmap, we're going to be discussing Abby's professional evolution, the challenges of practicing outside of bigger cities, my own recovery experience, and what we can learn from it. We'll also explore how physical therapy educations and licensure set the foundation for broader responsibilities. Plus, we'll talk some listener-oriented questions to help you navigate if your own loved one is suffering through a concussion journey. Let's jump right in. Let's start by talking about how you approach patient care 9 years ago versus how you do it now, and what changed the most for you.
9 years ago, I focused on what was on the script from the doctor, and concussions just weren't on my radar as much. Over time, I saw how untreated head injuries dramatically impacted patients' lives, so I had to adapt. I began seeking out continuing education, seminars, and research articles that were focused on post-concussion care. But there's just so much out there, it's hard to know where to start. And oftentimes, not knowing where to start makes you less likely to get started. The best thing I did was connect with someone who was successful and passionate about treating concussions. I'm very lucky that this person, Dr. Schaller, who's the medical director at Mid-Atlantic Concussion, happened to be as talented as he is and willing to share his expertise, and that had a huge influence on me. He had been an excellent mentor, and he was able to help kind of guide that process of where to start, what to read, where to find the best resources so that you can kind of just set yourself out to work.
What made you realize you needed to delve deeper into concussion management?
Mostly because I didn't even know where to start with the patient. So if someone came in with a headache, dizziness, light sensitivity, brain fog, what do you have them do? That can be an intimidating situation because you feel like no matter what, you're going to aggravate their symptoms. And that's not a good feeling for you as a therapist or for them as the patient. So as a physical therapist, we're used to having the intention of improving symptoms. And while that's still the case for concussions, we intend to improve them. It's hard to know how to get there when everything is an irritant to them at the beginning.
And you've also mentioned that, since you don't work in a big city, that comes with a lot of unique challenges. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. In a big city, you might have specialists for every possible condition. There's going to be one physical therapist that treats Parkinson's disease, another one that just treats pediatric patients, possibly with even a specific area of practice within pediatrics. And you might have another PT that specializes in concussions. But in a less urban area, like where we are, we kind of have to be a jack of all trades. We don't always have immediate access to specialists, even on the physician side. So it's essential for us to know how to handle a wide variety of conditions, or at least recognize when to refer patients out and find the specialist somewhere else.
That means if you're familiar with concussions, the other healthcare providers in your community might not have been either, right?
Exactly. So if primary care doctors are not always able to identify or pick out concussion symptoms, especially if they're subtle, that's even harder to do. The same thing exists with orthopedics or even some neurologists if concussions isn't part of their repertoire of what they do or what they enjoy treating. So part of my role became raising awareness of this so people can get intervention earlier on, because the earlier, the better.
Well, let's go a bit deeper. Could you share any memorable instances, without naming names, of course, where you kind of realized just how unrecognized concussions were in the community?
Oh man. Honestly, it's hard to narrow it down to just one example that would capture how often this comes up, but it's incredibly common, especially with sports injuries. So for many reasons. Whether it was not reported to the athletic trainer or they had an orthopedic injury along with their concussion, oftentimes the bigger injury is what's going to get all of the medical help and intervention. But even in work-related injuries, we see the same patterns. Someone falls from a high surface and impacts with something else or with someone else or the ground. All the things that would be the recipe for a concussion. But the first medical encounter will focus on what's bleeding, what's broken, and that seems to be where it starts and where it ends in the healthcare process after that injury. Unless we ask, we don't know. Meaning, unless we ask about what happened to the head and neck, where it ended up after the fall, what their first initial impressions were after the impact, we just won't know. I had a patient who had a minor car accident years ago. She never mentioned a head impact or a concussion to her physician because so much happened so fast. And honestly, I don't even know if she realized it. But she'd been suffering from chronic headaches and brain fog. And when I asked about any history of head trauma, it finally clicked that her life changed right after that accident. It was a classic example of an overlooked concussion. That moment really drove home the importance of screening every patient who's had a trauma or has been playing a contact sport. If they bring up post-concussion symptoms, no matter how long it's been, take the time to ask those follow-up questions to see if you can connect any dots.
Wow, that really makes you think. Like, I wonder how many people are out there right now just going around with undiagnosed concussions. I mean, it sounds like that experience propelled you to become more proactive.
Yes, it absolutely did.
And let's shift towards the physical therapy education. You mentioned PT school provides a basic overview of various practice settings. Can you outline like what that typically includes?
Sure. In PT school, you learn about musculoskeletal injuries, neurological conditions, pediatrics, geriatrics, and even specialized areas like wound care for burns but you go through everything in a very general sense. So PT schools require you to do rotations in different settings, like physical settings as well. Like you spend a couple months working in a hospital and then a couple months working in an inpatient rehab center, kind of like either the nursing home that you were at or a more specialized acute rehab center where you treat just spinal cord injuries or something like that. And then you need to have some experience in an outpatient clinic. And you have to try to put all of these concepts that you learned about on the academic side into motion into these settings.
So you get like a solid foundation, but not necessarily a specialty in one area.
Exactly. PT school is like a buffet. You get a taste of everything, but you don't become an expert in any single area. That expertise comes after graduation, and it's up to you as an individual to decide how good you want to be.
I remember hearing you say once, you can have 1 year of experience repeated 20 times or 20 years of progressively learned experience. Can you expand on that philosophy?
A colleague said that to me once, and when I heard it, I could immediately picture in my head the different kinds of physical therapists that I had come across in my career who fell into one of those two categories. And there really didn't seem to be any area in between. If you felt like you learned everything you needed to know in PT school and haven't sought out an expert to learn more about something that interests you, your 1 year of experience is on repeat. But this is an incredibly dynamic field of physical therapy. Things change constantly. There's some real pioneers in this profession that have created a new standard of care that involves active learning, collaborating, and getting outside of your bubble to really learn how you can help the person sitting in front of you when they're expecting you to solve a problem that they've had.
And that ties directly into how you've adapted to your practice to include concussion management.
Absolutely. If I stuck to the same approach that I was taught even just 7 years ago, I would be doing a massive disservice compared to what I know now. And I'm sure I'll be saying the same thing in just a couple years from now about what I'm doing today. That's how much there is to learn and how much research is being done in this field. I would say that at least once a week, I'm finding out something new about concussions with as rapidly as researchers are unveiling new discoveries. Now, not everything you read changes what you do, but it all comes together over time to reshape how you approach challenges with concussion management.
All right, let's go back in time. 9 years ago, after my accident. When I first came to see you, I'd been through multiple doctors, facilities, and as I've mentioned several times, my ankles and feet were hurt. From not being up and able to walk around, I mean, that's obviously what's going to happen. But there was one time when I had to climb up this hill to my house, and it was just like a whole new level of pain. Like it was pretty rough. But do you recall like your first impressions of me?
When you walked in, I saw the prescription from your primary care doctor that said ankle pain. So I just got to work on assessing your ankles. As you started the story about your accident, I had assumed that with the plethora of doctors that you had encountered, whatever else needed to be addressed must have been addressed by that point because you were already a few months out. I was just staying in my lane of thinking, I'm just the physical therapist. My job is to treat the orthopedic component that he was referred to for physical therapy. That was my mistake.
And, come to think of it, like I'm a pretty talkative guy. So there's probably a bunch of people who wouldn't even mention anything like that. But yeah, I can see like, so you were just essentially just doing what the doctor's script mentioned without looking any deeper.
Exactly. I didn't fully grasp that I could and should use my broader skill set to assess other potential issues, like post-concussion syndrome.
After my ankles felt better, I remember leaving physical therapy, but I still felt off. Trouble with memory, headaches, mood swings. What are your thoughts on that about that now?
Looking back, I feel like I missed an opportunity to ask the right questions. I didn't realize it was my job in the bigger picture of healthcare to go back to your doctor and relay your post-concussive symptoms to see if she could find you a specialist. At the time, I was definitely not the specialist. And I think if you had a neurologist, but even the neurologist that you had self-proclaimed that he wasn't a specialist in concussions, but between myself, your primary care doctor, and your neurologist, I bet one of us could have found you a concussion specialist to get you the care that you needed and start this process of treatment.
Oh yeah, and my main concern was just getting back to work. I didn't even think too much of it. But, it was like I was on an island though. Like my family, they were dealing with my emotional roller coaster. Um, I had no idea how to regain my old self. Like, what would you do differently now, knowing what you know now?
Oh man, so much. I would have assessed your concentration, your dual tasking, your headache symptoms, your exertion tolerance, your neck, your balance, your eye movements, your vestibular system, essentially your ability to function with the demands of your life. And I would have gotten you an appointment with a doctor who specializes in concussions on day one.
Can you speak about the specific interventions that might have helped me earlier so our listeners understand, the right care at the right time looks like?
Sure. So it has evolved a lot over the years, but if you were to see me today, first thing we would start with is your eye movements. I use a VR headset that has all these little cameras inside it that analyze your eye movements. This gives me tremendous insight into what's going on in your brain and where we need to start. I would do a thorough assessment of your upper cervical spine, that's the top part of your neck where it meets your head, your vestibular system, which is deep within your brain and your inner ears, and your balance with your eyes open, eyes closed, how your heart rate responds with different exercise, and of course, concentration, dual tasking. This is not an exhaustive list, but all of this helps create a picture of where we need to start and what we need to do.
Wow, that's awesome. Like I wish I would have knew about that back then. Um, Kind of like the VR, kind of like Jaden Daniels was using.
You and me both wish we knew about this back then, but that's why we're talking about it now, to help others realize where there are opportunities to address those symptoms that they're trying to deal with so they can get on with their lives in a healthy way instead of carrying these symptoms with them and trying to adapt around them.
And what's the best advice for other physical therapists who might be listening?
Stay curious and keep learning. If you suspect someone is dealing with a concussion, refer them right away to a specialist if you're not comfortable handling it yourself. And don't just rely on what's written on the script. Keep that analogy in mind that we shared early on about Travis's situation. That oftentimes someone can present and it looks like a huge blaze of a house fire, but they're being referred for the bush out front that's on fire, or a fire in the garage or out back in the shed. Those doctors that are referring to you might be the specialist that looks at just fires in the shed, and that's what lands them in your path. But if you have the opportunity to see the house on fire, that is the reason why the bush is on fire out front, or the garage is on fire, or the shed. Take that upon yourself to help provide feedback to the doctors that can get this person to the right place, especially if it's something like this, where these consequences are just so much more far-reaching into their quality of life than any other injury I know of.
Yeah, that would have been great. Like that is exactly what I needed. Like somebody to go and advocate for me. But what about say patients who are aware of that and they feel like their concerns aren't being addressed?
You have to advocate for yourself. Ask about the possibility of a concussion. Seek a second opinion if necessary. If you're not seeing somebody who spends the majority of their time treating concussions, you might need to seek out a specialist who does.
I definitely wish I would have known that for sure. But let's circle back to the idea of professional growth. How can physical therapists ensure they don't stagnate?
You have to go learn something, and there's so much out there. I would say if you're stagnant, go to a conference that's something you know very little or even nothing about, and just feel like the dumbest person in the room. And when you can sit with your humility for that weekend course or however long it is, now you're ready. If you've been stagnant for too long, you may have to learn how to learn. You need to know how much you don't know. And once you get a glimpse of that, you're ready. You're ready to be an active learner because you've gotten the fear of feeling dumb out of the way. Now it's time to get on board with realizing you have so much to learn and soak in whatever you can, however you can. Find experts. Ask them what they recommend reading or listening to, or what courses you could take. If you want to be good at something, start following someone who is better than you in that something. Connect with people who are ahead of you, and they'll show you the way.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. Like when I was a photographer, I would go to photography conventions and I would learn so much just by talking to other people there. It may not have even been in a seminar, just talking to somebody else who made me think of a new idea. So yeah, networking is a big thing, right?
Absolutely. I remember I reached out to someone I heard on a podcast that blew me away with how much she knew about concussions. I emailed her and I told her I was eager to learn, and what she was doing was just inspiring to me. 2 months later, I was headed out to a course that she was hosting and got to spend time with her in her clinic. Now, that was extraordinary mentorship on her behalf. So special shout out to Becky Bliss for doing that. She showed me what it means to teach and influence our profession in such a positive way. But social media even, that makes it so much easier these days to find experts. Just make sure they're the credentialed ones, of course, not just the influencers. and just start reading about the things that they think are important. And before you know it, you're more familiar and you're asking the right questions to get the right information.
In your opinion, what are some of the long-term consequences that people who don't receive proper concussion care, like athletes or, normal working people or even parents?
Untreated concussion symptoms can lead to chronic headaches, ongoing cognitive issues, mood instability, all sorts of consequences. For athletes, that might mean decreased performance or risking further injury. For someone at work, it might affect job performance, memory, and emotional regulation. Relationships, especially marriages, can suffer because loved ones might not be fully aware or fully understand the personality changes or emotional changes that come with a concussion, especially if that person has had multiple.
What would you say to families or caregivers who are watching their loved ones go through post-concussion challenges?
Patience and open communication are key. If you understand what they're going through, you'll understand how important it is to not take anything personally. Now, you also have to kind of be the voice that encourages your loved one to seek professional help. You don't want to ignore symptoms like irritability, forgetfulness, disconnecting from social engagements, or disconnecting from even regular exercise routines because they're symptomatic. If you know someone has had a whiplash or a head impact, see if there's any correlation with when their symptoms emerged.
And that brings us back to the question, imagine how different things would have been for me if I had the right care the first time. And I'm not saying you give me the wrong care, ankles were perfect, and what you don't know. But it's a powerful thought, for anybody dealing with a head injury.
It really is. Timely intervention can mean the difference between struggling for years, like you have, versus recovering in a matter of weeks or months.
Yeah, for sure. And it has definitely been a struggle. There are things I certainly wish I would have known.
Exactly. I hope these discussions help individuals who have had a concussion in the past, who may still have symptoms, as well as the healthcare providers who can recognize opportunities to get someone to a specialist as early as possible.
But all right, folks, I think that gives us an idea of how important this is to bring more attention to the symptoms of concussions and traumatic brain injuries. This all can be treated and improved upon, but it all starts with recognizing it first.
Yes, so if you're curious about the ins and outs of living with chronic concussion symptoms, or you're supporting someone who is, be sure to tune in.
And next week, we'll dive even deeper. We'll be discussing what happens when people go for years without getting proper concussion care. We'll talk about the long-term effects on athletic performance, job stability, and professional and personal relationships. Things we only touched on today.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks again for tuning in to Concussion. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow us and share it with someone you may think will find it useful. You can catch us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For updates and behind-the-scenes content, check out our TikTok, Instagram, and X. Or join our growing community on Discord, where we dive deeper into concussion recovery and support each other along the way. All links are in the description, so see you there. And until next time, keep your head in the game and keep it protected.